Good morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristen. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering Bonaventure Cemetery, located in Savannah, Georgia. So grab your favorite mug, cozy up, and let's take a dig into history. Located on a bluff off the Wilmington River, within Savannah city limits, sits 160 acres of an old plantation called Bonaventure. Avenues lined with oak trees dipped in Spanish moss lead guests to graves within Victorian gardens. The air perfumed with magnolias and azaleas surrounding the grounds create breathtaking sights in any season, beckoning to visitors. Bonaventure is notoriously haunted and one of the most recognizable cemeteries in the world, yet not known to many by name. Even to you listeners unknowingly have seen the infamous Bird Girl statue from inside the grounds. In the 1994 novel, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, it took the world by storm and became a bestseller overnight, with the photograph of Bonaventure on the cover, known to almost all. Southern hospitality in this Savannah cemetery goes well beyond the grave, but let's first start at the very beginning of Bonaventure's history. In around the 1760s, before the Revolutionary War, an English colonel, John Malvern, decided to settle into Savannah, Georgia, and built a plantation on the bluff of what is now known as the Wilmington River. Comprised of 600 acres, Malvern decided on its famous name Bonaventure, meaning good fortune in French. Malvern's exquisite vision for the grounds created spacious avenues lined with oak trees on the acreage, each planted 15 feet apart. These oaks would later grow into canopies, providing shade for the famous avenues in the cemetery today. In the late 1700s, right before the Revolutionary War, the colonel and his son-in-law, Josiah Tatnall Jr., were loyalists to the British Crown. This would make Bonaventure's future complicated in the years to come. After the arrest of Royal Governor Sir James Wright in 1776, both men assisted in his escape via the Bonaventure plantation to a British vessel and then also fled the city. The plantation fell into American Allied hands but was short-lived when the British invasion of Georgia occurred in the December of 1778. The Americans then attempting to recapture Georgia had a huge failure in the Siege of Savannah in 1779, where Savannah then remained under British rule till the end of the war. After the siege, it's rumored to have been a hospital for the French, Haitian, and Allied casualties, and it's speculated they are likely the first buried on the grounds, but in unmarked graves. In 1783, after the British were defeated, Bonaventure was turned over to the Americans, who confiscated the land, and it was briefly sold to a John Habersham for 2 years. During his time in exile in England, Josiah Tatnall Jr. attended Eton College, and upon returning to Georgia in 1785, he repurchased Bonaventure. During the Creek Indian War, he served as a major, commanding troops in the Georgia militia in 1787 to 88, and in 1793. Jr. was appointed by President George Washington Marshal of Georgia in 1794, and was later elected Brigadier General of the 1st Regiment of Georgia Militia before getting into politics. He went on to serve as the senator, then governor of Georgia. Tatnall County in southeast Georgia was named in his honor. The Tatnall's ownership would be critical to the future for Bonaventure Cemetery, as they created the first private cemetery on the plantation. Harriet Tatnall, Josiah's wife, in 1802, was the first to be buried in the family plot. This was customary in the times that families with farmland or plantations would have their own private cemeteries. Her husband Josiah would then join her shortly, being buried next to her in 1803. The last Tatnall to own Bonaventure was Commodore Josiah Tatnall III, a decorated naval officer. His career as a naval officer was not only lengthy but impressive. He was first orphaned by the deaths of his parents in 1803 and went to live with his grandfather in England. Returning to America in 1812, and immediately joined the U.S. Navy. He fought Algerian pirates under Commodore Stephen Decatur, was wounded in action during the Mexican War, reported for duty on the Great Lakes, became a flag officer, and then the commander of the East India Squadron at Hong Kong in 1858, where he famously assisted British warships attacking Chinese forts in 1859, violating the U.S. neutrality, then defending his actions by quoting the proverb, "Blood is thicker than water." During the Civil War, he resigned from the U.S. Navy in 1861, joining the Confederate Navy. The irony being that although he didn't agree with the succession, he still took up arms with the South, like many others caught up in the war. In 1862, Tatnall III became the Confederate commander of the Virginia, where he infamously blew up the CSS Virginia ironclad, fearing it would be captured by Union troops, and was then court-martialed after others felt blowing up the ship had been unnecessary, but acquitted shortly after. He was then captured as a prisoner of war and paroled in May of 1865, moving to Nova Scotia, Canada in 1866 for just 4 years, till he became penniless. Tatnall III moved back to Savannah, where the city created the position of inspector of the port, in order to provide him an income, passing away peacefully in 1871 and was buried within Bonaventure. He was one of only 6 children in the Tatnalls who survived past adolescence. His siblings are all buried on the family plot. The Tatnalls would own Bonaventure until 1846, when it was then sold to a man named Peter Wiltberger. Wiltberger bought the land for a private cemetery, bringing Bonaventure Cemetery into existence. This existence was within the age of rural or garden cemeteries in the Victorian era, where it was common among the wealthy to create a haven of beauty for mourners among the graves of loved ones. Bonaventure's creation and design wasn't too different from other wealthy cemeteries in its era, yet had its own Southern Gothic je ne sais quoi in allure, making all the difference to visitors once inside the grounds. Wiltberger felt Bonaventure needed a superior name from its competition, the other rural garden in Savannah, Laurel Grove. He felt the new name needed to stress the beauty of the impressive lush garden landscape, and thus Bonaventure was renamed Evergreen Cemetery. It was during this time that artists, travelers, and the public really started to appreciate the beauty of the cemetery. The oak trees were finally maturing, draping over the graves with their branches, providing ample shade in the hot Georgia summers. With large avenues to stroll through and gardens, the grounds became popular for picnics and not just mourners, giving inspiration to the art community. The first being a poem Bonaventure by Starlight by Henry Roots Jackson, published in the Southern magazine The Orion. Sierra Club founder John Muir found himself stranded in Savannah in 1867. He famously slept among the graves while documenting the plants and nature for his 1,000-mile walk to Florida from Kentucky. Waiting on a money transfer, he found peace and beauty among the graves and heavily documented his nights within. Writing, I gazed, awe-stricken, as one who arrived from another world. Bonaventure is called a graveyard, a town of the dead, but the few graves are powerless in such a death of life. The rippling of living waters, the song of birds, the joyous confidence of flowers, the calm, undisturbable grandeur of the oaks, mark this place of graves as one of the Lord's most favored abodes of life and light. The beauty became well known and cherished by the Savannah community of the cemetery. Songwriter and singer Johnny Mercer and co-founder of Capitol Records, who wrote the famous song Moon River from the 1961 classic movie Breakfast at Tiffany's, is a resident of Bonaventure. The song was inspired by a full moon over a river in Savannah by his childhood home. Mercer wrote hits Days of Wine of Roses, Autumn Leaves, and Hooray for Hollywood. He wrote the lyrics to more than 1,500 songs, including compositions for movies and Broadway shows. He received 19 Oscar nominations and won 4 Best Original Song Oscars. The song Moon River is ranked 4th in the American Film Institute's list of top film songs of all time. For the randomly odd trivia fan, Mercer is also a distant cousin of General George S. Patton. Mercer's grave is a huge presence in Bonaventure, drawing in Moon River fans from all over the world or others from his greatest hits. Conrad Aiken Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, who also won the National Book Award and the Bollingen Prize in Poetry, is buried within as well. Prominent Savannah resident Mary Telfair is also a resident of the cemetery, but her grave is not within the Telfair family plot, due to the family rifts going to the grave and beyond. She was an art collector, philanthropist, and started the first art museum in the South. Following her death, an inventory of her estate revealed that her collection numbered over 200 pieces, including paintings, prints, statues, and plasters. She was the last of the Telfair family, giving her wealth via her will to the city of Savannah. Her most well-known legacy, however, is the Telfair Academy that is located in her former home in Telfair Square. The Telfair family name might be familiar to some history buffs, as one of the American's founding fathers, who served as governor of Georgia from 1786 to 1787, and again from 1790 to 1793. He was a member of the Continental Congress and one of the signees of the Articles of Confederation. Sadly, Telfair was a slave trader, a shameful part of American history that to this day is still an open wound for many, and thus why we won't dig further into the Telfair family history. The visual art created for grave sites in the cemetery by craftsmen has a lengthy and prolific list from all over the United States. It feels less like a cemetery and more like a sculptural garden. The carved headstones, obliques, and architectural mausoleums created lavish memorials to those lost and saw no spared expense from the wealthy. The famous Philadelphia Marble Company, Struthers & Sons, was used by many of Savannah's elite during this time. The most famous sculptural works within is German-American John Waltz. He has 70 known works in the cemetery, with even more thought to be undiscovered. His most famous work is statue of 6-year-old Gracie Watson. Watson's statue leads us into a more intriguing area of the cemetery, its hauntings. The most famous work of Waltz is claimed to be haunted. Known as Little Gracie, Watson died at the age of 6 from pneumonia. She was the only daughter of the owners of the now demolished Pulaski House Hotel of Savannah in Johnson Square. She would play in the hotel lobby and square greeting guests. She is said to haunt the square late into the evening, appearing to those who sit late at night on the square's benches, sometimes saying hello. Her grave is one of the most visited in the cemetery, with visitors leaving her gifts of toys. It's rumored that if you attempt to remove her toys, her statue's eyes cry with red blood. Some accounts of visitors claiming to be greeted vocally by a little girl when approaching her grave are also claimed, even though no little girl was present. There's also a local tale that if you place a quarter in Gracie's hand and encircle her statue 3 times, the coin will disappear. A fence surrounding her grave is claimed to not keep visitors out, but to keep little Gracie in. Some believe you can hear her playing among the graves. But little Gracie is not the only girl rumored to haunt the grounds. The ghost of 8-year-old Lorraine Greedman is said to haunt the Bird Girl statue. Lorraine modeled for Sylvia Shaw Judson, the sculptor who created the statue, and is said to be heard playing nearby. Judson made 6 unique castings of the Bird Girl, 5 in bronze and 1 in lead, which are scattered across the United States, which questions why Lorraine might haunt just this particular statue of herself in Bonaventure. Visitors also claim statues of angels that reputedly change facial expressions upon visit to visit. People have recounted their facial expressions transform from showing anguish to sorrow to peacefulness. The ground's history from plantation times intertwines into the hauntings too. The plantation experienced 2 fires, once during 1771 and again in 1800. During one of the fires, a party reportedly was taking place. The host, determined to not have his night end in ashes, led his guests outside, continuing the dinner party. He then entertained his guests by the light of the fire, with continuous toasts. The host would then dramatically smash his glass against an oak tree nearby, and guests would follow suit. At night, visitors claim to hear the smashing of crystal and laughter, if you are quiet enough, when exploring the cemetery. The Bonaventure Historical Society confirms the fires are true, but the party is rumored to be local folktale. Ghost dogs are rumored to guard the grounds at night, into the evening, with visitors claiming to be chased out of Bonaventure's gates. Some say it might be local dogs loose from houses nearby, but witnesses swear they were chased from dogs beyond the grave. Snarls, barking, and paws can be heard throughout. The downside of the fame from the novel Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil is fans visiting the cemetery taking dirt from the grounds home with them. The character Minerva, the voodoo priestess, was said to use graveyard dirt for casting spells and hexes in the novel. Readers missed a particularly important detail, though, that the cemetery Minerva collected her dirt from is in Beaufort, South Carolina, and not Bonaventure in Savannah. This hasn't stopped fans from taking jars of dirt, however. But with great superstition, we advise if you plan on taking anything from a graveyard, you must leave something in its place, such as an offering, or you might leave more than what you entered with. And we're not just talking about the dirt. The city of Savannah hasn't exactly accepted the tales or rumors of hauntings with open arms, stating visitors are encouraged to appreciate the historical and cultural significance of the sites and the people interred there, the cemetery architecture, the scenery, and the natural ecosystems which inhabit the sites. In 1868, Wilberger's son William formed the Evergreen Cemetery Company of Bonaventure, seeing the cemetery through the Civil War. It was then sold in 1907 to the city of Savannah. The change in ownership saw Evergreen change its name back to Bonaventure, honoring its past. Fasting forward to 1994, the Bonaventure Historical Society was established to help preserve and provide education on the historical site. This was the same year the novel Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil was published. Prior to its release in 1994, Jack Lee was given the job of photographing Savannah to create a picture for the book cover. After an unsuccessful few days in the city, Brent, the book's author, suggested Bonaventure Cemetery, which led Lee to the statue of the bird girl. He wandered the grounds till almost dusk when he fell upon the statue, known to the Trodsdale family, whose plot it resided on, as Little Wendy. The composition and timing of the photograph were perfect, and set to become the most well-known book cover in history. Lee is also a resident of Bonaventure. Sadly, due to the popularity and fearing vandalism, the statue was relocated to the Telfair Museum later on, where it is on display for museum visitors. Most interpret the statue as the weighing of good versus evil, but the bowls in her hands are actually intended to hold food and or water for birds, which may have also been designed to function as a fountain too. Yet Lee's photo remains iconic, and not being able to be recreated by visitors from the rehoming of the statue, giving it even more allure. Finally, in 2001, Bonaventure was placed on the National Register of Historic Places, cementing its place in history. Whatever reason you find yourself at the gates of Bonaventure, we encourage you enter. Hauntings, folktales, and history fill the avenues beneath the oak trees with mysteries for every visitor to discover within. We believe the Southern Gothic gravesite is worthy of all its tales, true or false. The grave grind for Bonaventure Cemetery was a nitro cold brew from the Coffee Fox on historic Broughton Street in downtown Savannah, Georgia. Please visit the-grim.com for more honorary grinds in the area. For now, we're closing the gate on Bonaventure Cemetery. We hope you enjoyed our dig into history. If you did, subscribe today and join us next time when we open the gate on the Grim.